What's up, everybody? It's Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, and we're back with some UFC DFS picks and lineup advice for UFC 253 on Fight Island between Adesanya and Costa. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about both of the 5-round fights on this card. We're going to talk about the top plays, our predictions and picks from a DFS standpoint, fights to target, fights to avoid, and then some general lineup construction tips for both FanDuel and DraftKings. We'll use the Occupy model, our real-time player dashboard, occupyfantasy.com, that ranks every fighter on the slate for both FanDuel and DraftKings. And then if you want more in-depth thoughts on each fighter on the slate, I encourage you to check out MMA DFS.com. They have an article called The Sheet that goes in-depth on each fighter. They're partnered with us. They actually provide our DraftKings projected ownership for our Occupy model. And before we get started, go ahead and click that subscribe button. That way you get access to all of our videos as soon as they're released. You'll be notified, especially when we do these UFC videos for the big events. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video. As we've said in our previous videos, the more thumbs ups that we get, the more likely we are to do these types of videos, so it helps us out. And if you have any questions about this slate, hop in our Discord channel. Links in the description below on how to join that, or just comment on this YouTube video and we'll get back to you with our advice before the slate locks 7 p.m. Eastern on Saturday afternoon, depending on where you are. So, 2 5-round fights, 2 title fights on this card. Adesanya and Costa, Reyes and Blachowicz. So, let's bring up our MMA Occupy model. Again, this is occupyfantasy.com. As we say in every UFC video, the fighters are ranked by our proprietary metric called OF Index. And OF Index, basically how I like to explain it, is a fighter's likelihood to win combined with their likelihood to be in the optimal lineup if they do win. So it's a probability plus upside metric. Takes a lot into account, and it's just one easy to read number for the slate. So if we're looking at the 2 5-round fights, let's just get the 5-round fights in the model here. Reyes and Blachowicz, and Adesanya and Costa, and also it's Blachowicz. Make sure I get his name right. Been working on my pronunciations in these videos. So Blachowicz. And 2 very different fights. And this is how we look at it, especially from a tournament perspective and then even in a low-risk perspective. Now, on an 11-fight card, we have 2 5-round fights. And as always in UFC DFS, the 5-rounders have more value because, surprise, they have 2 more rounds to rack up fantasy points. Now, in low-risk contests, you'll want to get at least 1 fighter from each of these fights. Whether it's the Adesanya-Costa fight, Blachowicz, and Reyes fight, you want to get fighters from both fights, at least 1. Maybe you do a stack here in your low-risk contest because you want to lock up points, and maybe that's the case here. But in high-risk contests, I'm not sure we necessarily need a fighter from both fights. And as we'll talk about towards the end of the video for DraftKings strategies, maybe there's some outcomes where neither winner from a main event or from a 5-round fight ends up in the optimal lineup. It's possible. If you look at Adesanya and Costa here and here, at 7,700, Costa, if he wins, typically high volume, likely going to win from a finish. He's very rare chance he's going to win in a decision here. So if we look at that, that means Costa, if he wins at 7,700, very likely to be in the optimal lineup. So a much better choice from an underdog perspective. Adesanya, there's a chance he just boxes his way through this, picks up points, wins rounds. He said he wants to knock out Costa. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But there's definitely paths to failure for Adesanya in a victory, especially at his price of $21 on FanDuel, $8,500 on DraftKings. And despite being the favorite, his knockout chances are only 7% higher than Costa's. And Adesanya, if you look through his game logs, you might say, wow, he scored really high in DFS before. And he's gotten pretty fortunate in the knockdown department. He had 4 knockdowns in 1 fight, had another knockdown at the buzzer in another fight. So assuming he doesn't get an abnormal amount of knockdowns in this fight, he's going to need to finish Costa, and he's going to have to do it early. And we're not convinced that happens. Maybe it does, but in this fight, Costa is definitely the better DFS play. Now, in the Reyes and Blachowicz fight, you see Reyes, he actually has the 2nd highest knockout potential on the entire slate at 46%. Let's get all the fighters here and let's sort by KO percentage. Reyes, number 2 on the slate. Now, Shouldn't be a ton of volume on either side between Reyes and Blachowicz, but again, decent amount of knockout potential. And the big thing here is Reyes, if he wins, it's probably going to come from knockout at 46%. And Blachowicz, even if he wins, even if he somehow wins a decision, his price tag 7,200. He should get enough points in 5 rounds to pay off that price tag. It's not like the Adesanya fight where volume may be an issue. Here, Blachowicz, if he wins and it comes by any method, he's likely to be in the optimal lineup at 7,200. So play him accordingly. Reyes, I would probably, if you're playing multiple lineups, have 40 to 50% exposure and match his knockout percent chance. Playing one lineup, Reyes is the better option, but I see the argument for both sides in this fight for tournaments. So we talked about him being the second highest in the knockout column. If we just look at the rankings here, we've seen Juan Espino number 1. Now, Espino hasn't fought since 2018. Had some hand surgeries, and then the pandemic got in the way. But this guy's a DFS goldmine. Hunts takedowns, hunts submissions. He's older, and the long layoff certainly can cause us to raise an eyebrow, but it's not like he's fighting a great opponent. Minus 305 favorite, 10-cent move on the money line in his favor, so the betting markets aren't concerned with his age or his layoff. And he actually has the highest OF index on the slate at 116. Probably our preferred play in that $9,100 range, and a great MVP option on FanDuel at $19. So if we look down the list here, we see a couple other. We see Brad Riddell, Kamer, and then Adesanya 39%, Jake Matthews, and a couple other guys here in that 30% range. Now, actually, you know what? Before we jump into FanDuel MVP options, let's look at the biggest line moves. We talked about Espino having a 10-cent move in his favor. The biggest line move on the slate belongs to Ludovic Klein, who's making his debut against Shane Young. Klein, very precision fighter, not a ton of volume, but his kicks and his knockout potential are crazy. And a lot of times we'll get some inefficient lines on these guys making their UFC debut. And we probably see the case here. As the line moves 57 cents in his favor, he opened as an underdog. He's now the favorite. Let's see who else we got here. We have, I'm just consulting my pronunciation guy just to make sure I get it right. Takugov, number 2. Now, this fight is one of the fights we could probably avoid, especially if you're making a limited number of lineups. Takugov and Dawodu. Very low knockout potential, very low volume on both sides. But the betting market is favoring Takugov here. The interesting one is Danilo Marquez. Real unknown, making his debut. And fight tape is tough to come by on him. It's not like we only have cell phone videos, like video footage like we had on some fighters in the past. We do have some tape, but not a ton on Marquez. Wide range of outcomes for this fight because he's fighting, and I'm again just consulting my guide here, but Ibragimov has fought some tough competition in his UFC. In his UFC fights. If you're just game log watching and you look at Ibragimov, you see he lost 3 times, hasn't scored a ton, and there's a reason because we'll see his ownership very low on both sites. Let's sort by DraftKings ownership, and we see Ibragimov 17% on DraftKings, 33%, a little higher on FanDuel, but we don't expect him to be very popular. Marquez 15%. This is crazy. 32% projected ownership combined on DraftKings. Yet their knockout potential, let's scroll down so you can actually see this, 62% combined. So the chances of this fight finishing early does not match the field's perception of this fight. And I think a lot of it has to do with the lack of information on Marquez, the fact that he's an underdog. Again, the betting markets like him, 30-cent move in his favor. And Ibragimov, because he's lost 3 straight fights, and it was against tough competition. He fought that psycho Delice, who KO'd him in the first round. He fought Ed Herman, who's fought a million fights in the UFC. And he's fought another fighter who's 2-0 in the UFC. He's 8-3 lifetime as an MMA fighter. 0-3 in the UFC. Pre-UFC, he was 8-0 against some questionable competition, but Marquez is probably in line with the competition that he's faced. Whereas Marquez, again, okay, maybe Ibragimov just sucks. Maybe he's terrible. And he's actually a terrible UFC fighter. And Marquez has an upset chance here. Marquez, in the tape that we found, has tons of takedown potential. And again, 28% KO chance at 7,500. This is definitely a fight to target on both sides heavily. I think I prefer Ibragimov at 8,700. I don't think a lot of people are going to play him. But again, you're playing multiple lineups. I think you want to get a lot of exposure to this fight based on the knockout chances compared to the field's expectations. The field is not in line with the actual probability of this fight ending high in DFS scoring. All right, a couple more items to talk about before we get out of here. All right, let's talk about DraftKings tournaments. If you're playing tournaments on DraftKings, here are some strategies. Again, because of the fact there are 2 5-round fights, this gives us options to get unique pretty easily. If we only use one main, I say main event, we'll call it main event for 5-round fights. If you only use one main event fighter in your lineup, that'll be pretty unique. If you use 0 main event fighters, and that's certainly possible on this slate, if both go to decision and both favorites win, it's very possible that they don't end up in the optimal lineup. You have a very unique lineup. If you want to get even more unique, or you use 1 or 2 main event fighters, you can just leave some more salary on the table, $500, $1,000, depending on the size of your tournament. And again, it's very easy to get unique on this slate and have a high upside, high DFS scoring roster. FanDuel, it's even easier, as we've talked about in these videos before. With most people looking at the top of the FanDuel salary pool, if we just sort by FanDuel salary here, Reyes and Adesanya, main event favorites, are going to likely be the highest owned FanDuel MVP options. That's just how it normally works. As a result, we can play the main event underdogs at much reduced ownership, especially Costa. 5% projected on MVP at the MVP spot on FanDuel because of his price tag, $19 in his money line. But again, if he wins, it's going to come from knockout. Has a chance to score heavy on FanDuel. Or you could just look at some of the fighters who have high first round KO chances because that's so important on FanDuel. And if you look, I'm looking at the back end of our model here. Fighters that have high round 1 KO chances, it's Espino at number 1 by far. And then after that, we have a bunch of fighters grouped in that 15 to 20% round 1 KO probability. We talk about Brad Riddell, Kamer, and his opponent Knight. Both of those guys have high, or at least relatively high compared to the rest of the slate, round 1 KO probabilities. Klein, and then of course the Ibragimov and Marquez fight. Again, not saying you do this in all of your lineups or even if you're making one lineup, but Marquez, a chance to get a round 1 KO. He has a top 7 or 8 probability here, and we don't project him to be very highly owned at all. So interesting spot for that fight. And again, FanDuel, it's so easy. As long as you don't play a super high owned MVP, the rest of your lineup is almost always differentiated and unique. So, all right, if you have more questions, hop in our Discord channel. Links in the description below on how to join that, or just comment here on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video. We always appreciate that. And be sure to click that subscribe button, please. Helps us out, helps you out, because you're notified when our latest UFC videos are released, as well as any NFL, PGA, other strategy videos that we do. OccupyFantasy.com is where you get access to the Occupy model. This will continue to be updated throughout the night, throughout the morning, throughout the afternoon as betting odds change and other factors change. And then again, MMADFS.com is where you check out the sheet, our partner who puts out not only our DraftKings projected ownership, but great fighter notes for each fight on the slate. So, Brian Jester for Occupy Fantasy. Appreciate you listening. Good luck, and we'll talk to you soon.